Welcome back to The Explainer. Today we're diving straight into what is easily one of the most intense, ongoing debates in all of fitness culture and exercise science. Picture this, right? You've just finished a completely grueling workout. Your muscles are absolutely screaming, you're drenched in sweat, you're exhausted. So what do you do next? Do you immediately plunge into a freezing ice bath to soothe that soreness? Or do you hop on a stationary bike and just keep the blood flowing? This whole debate between freezing your muscles and keeping them moving has literally divided athletes, coaches, and scientists for years. Well, today, we're putting opinions aside. We're going to look at the hard science to find out what is actually happening inside your body when you make that choice.
To finally settle this debate systematically, we're unpacking a highly comprehensive 2026 study published in Experimental Physiology, led by Roberts and his team. Now, for years, the prevailing worry, you've probably heard this, has been that taking an ice bath might actually steal your gains. The fear is that the cold shuts down the inflammation and stress signals your body desperately needs to build stronger muscles. So this study was specifically designed to uncover the physiological truth, which method is genuinely better for muscle recovery, adaptation, and, your overall long-term longevity.
So here is our agenda for today. First up, the great recovery debate. Second, designing the experiment. Third, the short-term shock. Fourth, long-term muscle adaptations. And finally, we'll wrap up with the final verdict.
Section 1. The Great Recovery Debate.
Okay, so the core of this conflict really comes down to a fundamental biological paradox. We all know cold water feels amazing on sore muscles, right? But does freezing those muscles actually stop the beneficial stress signals we need for long-term growth and resilience? To understand this, we have to talk about something called oxidative stress. Usually, when you hear oxidative stress, you probably think of cellular damage, aging, bad stuff. But in the context of exercise, it's actually completely different. Oxidative stress, specifically these reactive oxygen species created when your muscles contract, acts as a really crucial biological trigger. It's basically a cellular text message that tells your body, hey, that was a tough workout, we need to build bigger muscles and more mitochondria so we can handle it better next time. We call this process mitochondrial biogenesis. The big fear in the fitness world has been that an ice bath acts like a giant fire extinguisher, just putting out this oxidative stress before it can send those vital growth signals.
Section 2. Designing the experiment.
To test if ice baths actually blunt this critical molecular signaling, the researchers knew they needed a highly rigorous framework. They went with a really smart, two-pronged approach. First, they ran an acute study, a short-term crossover design with 9 active males to measure the immediate day of shock to the system. But they didn't stop there. They also ran a chronic study, a parallel group design where 21 males strength-trained twice a week for 3 whole months. This design is fantastic because it lets us see both the immediate genetic triggers right after a workout and the actual real-world muscle adaptations that happen over a quarter of a year.
Within this framework, they pitted 2 very distinct recovery methods against each other. In one corner, we have cold water immersion, 10 minutes sitting in 10 degrees Celsius water, which, if you've never done it, is seriously cold. In the other corner, active recovery, 10 minutes of low-intensity cycling. Crucially, these treatments were applied within 5 minutes of finishing heavy resistance training. That timing is absolutely key here, because that 5-minute window is exactly when those oxidative stress signals are just starting to fire up.
Section 3. The Short-Term Shock.
So what actually happens in the blood and the muscles in those critical minutes and hours right after the workout? Well, the researchers found that cold water immersion did in fact alter the systemic environment. F2 isoprostanes, which are basically markers of lipid peroxidation, a clear sign of oxidative stress, were actually lower after the ice bath compared to the bike. Meanwhile, glutathione peroxidase, which is a major antioxidant enzyme, was higher at the 2-hour mark in the cold water group. Now, on the surface, this looks exactly like that fire extinguisher effect everyone was so terrified of, right? The cold water clearly reduced the stress markers circulating in the blood.
But, and this is a massive but, when the researchers actually looked inside the muscle tissue itself by taking biopsies, a completely different story emerged. Let's look at these redox-regulated genes, NRF2, HMOX1, and a handful of others. These are the crucial early genetic triggers that command the muscle to adapt and grow. After exercise, the expression of all these genes spiked beautifully. But here is the critical finding. There was absolutely no difference between the cold water immersion group and the active recovery group. None. The ice bath did not shut down the genetic growth signals inside the muscle. That cellular text message we talked about earlier, it was sent loud and clear, regardless of the freezing water.
Section 4. Long-term muscle adaptations.
Okay, so knowing that the early genetic signals remain totally intact, the next question is,
do these signals actually translate into permanent muscle changes over time? Looking at how this builds over 3 months, we can see the abundance and activity of mitochondrial enzyme complexes. Think of these complexes as the actual machinery inside your cells that generates energy. If ice baths were truly stealing gains, we would expect to see lower mitochondrial growth here, but the data shows something else entirely. Mitochondrial complexes I and IV increased significantly after the 3 months of training, and they remained completely equal between both recovery groups. So, whether you biked or whether you froze, your cellular engine leveled up just the same.
And further data perfectly confirms this. Citrate synthase and AMPK. These act as the master regulators and the main indicators of your overall mitochondrial volume and efficiency. Once again, both of these increased beautifully as a result of the resistance training, and again, there was zero statistical difference between the ice bath group and the active recovery group. They were identical.
I want to pause here and emphasize the duration. 3 months of heavy resistance training twice a week, followed immediately by these recovery protocols. In the world of exercise science, 3 months is a very solid chunk of time. This wasn't just a fluke from a single random weekend workout. This really underscores the conservative, highly reliable nature of these findings. Over the long term, the ice bath simply did not sabotage mitochondrial adaptation.
But wait, because here is the real plot twist. The researchers used a really cool technique called near-infrared spectroscopy, or NIRS, to look at how the muscles were actually utilizing oxygen in real time. And what they found was wild. The cold water immersion group actually developed better muscle oxygen kinetics. During the exercise tests, the cold water group showed slower oxygen desaturation, which means they didn't run out of oxygen as fast, and they had greater total oxygen consumption. Essentially, the chronic repeated use of cold water immersion helped their muscles act like a much more efficient engine, delivering and utilizing oxygen significantly better than the active recovery group.
Section 5. The final verdict.
So let's summarize this absolute wealth of data and see what the researchers ultimately concluded. The authors stated, cold water immersion after resistance exercise does not alter acute redox-related transcription or chronic mitochondrial adaptations, whereas it might improve muscle oxygen kinetics. This conclusion is just perfectly stated. It's highly appropriate and totally justified by both their molecular biopsy data and those nearest physiological readings. They didn't overstate their case at all. They simply pointed out that the whole fear of losing your gains to the ice is basically totally unfounded. And hey, there might actually be this unexpected metabolic bonus.
So, what are the real-world implications for us, especially if we look at this through the broader lens of longevity and healthy aging? Well, first off, it firmly debunks that pervasive fitness myth that cold water immersion steals your gains. It confirms that the vital stress signaling pathways in your muscles, the exact pathways that keep you strong and metabolically young, remain perfectly intact even when you heavily chill the tissue. Furthermore, building a resilient oxidative engine that processes oxygen more efficiently is a huge asset. As we get older, metabolic decline and mitochondrial dysfunction are major drivers of frailty. Upgrading your muscle's oxygen engine, which is potentially aided by cold exposure, is a fantastic strategy for combating that age-related decline.
Which leaves us with this final thought. Knowing what the science actually says now, knowing that ice baths won't sabotage your hard-earned gains, that they don't block those necessary genetic signals, and that they might actually upgrade your muscle's oxygen engine over time, how are you going to adapt your own recovery routine? Are you going to embrace the freeze, or are you going to stick to the bike? The science is empowering, the myth is busted, and the choice is now entirely yours.